Welcome back to our second segment, and this segment is for March 23rd, 2024. We'll be discussing emerging markets and lesson of the week. So, with emerging markets, this is as of Wednesday. You can see how the markets had done till that for the week till Wednesday. You see Poland, Russia, and Switzerland. Of course, we will talk about Switzerland, Australia, and basically South Korea, Taiwan. They were all down for the week. Egypt had again, they got the IMF loan, but they are going to continue increasing the rates. So still, I mean, you see the countries like Argentina, and look at Argentina was up 12.8% till then. They're still leading when you think about Argentina, Egypt, we look at Taiwan, and of course, Turkey. So we'll discuss that and look at what Japan has done. And we've been talking about Japan, and we talked about the rate of actually going positive, and then actually Japanese yen actually went down. So when we look at the markets, you see it's still positive. This is a 2 months, and I'm using 20 and 50-day moving average. You see how nicely a lot of these markets are up. But you know, we look at the situation with the Brazil, and then China, you know, below their 20-day moving average. And India has been in a correction. There's been parliamentary elections. And then we look at this Japan. Look at how nicely it has moved. We discussed it that, you know, Japan was one of our picks for the 2024. So it's been pretty strong. So with that in mind, talking about Japan, it was amazing. Finally, it should be a good lesson for other economies. What has happened in 1990s, 2000, 2010, and 2020s, what has happened in Japan. So Bank of Japan finally, again, I mentioned on Tuesday, they ended towards only negative rates. So they raised their short-term rates to 0%, 0 to 10. So that mid will be 0.05 basis point from daily spread negative 0.1%. And also this is very important that they abandoned or they left the yield curve control and ended most of its asset purchases at you know, that was for the policy easing. So that's what I mentioned. This is kind of a change regime. And again, there was a sell-off of yen against major currencies, including dollars. So that was a big thing, and we've been expecting this, and the markets kind of were prepared for this. So again, that's something that I think we should continue paying attention. So this is very interesting. Talking about Japan increasing the rates. Turkey has been so radical in the last few years with everybody else increasing the rates. Turkey was actually cutting the rates. And now finally they've come to their senses with inflation being so high. There is, with the elections had gone, Erdogan is, it seems like it's giving more confidence, and the central bank finally doing the sensible thing. So they actually, surprisingly, they increased 500 basis point of their policy rate. So it went from 45% to 50%. So that was interesting, and that was important for the markets. But everywhere else that we look at, you know, US is on hold. They need more data. But the Swiss National Bank was the first really developed, when you look at the census of the largest central banks, the first one which actually cut its rates by 0.25%. So now it's at 1.5%, and that happens as of Friday. So, and this is the first time since June 2022 that they've cut the rates. To continue with that, we look at like the Czech National Bank, and they had reduced it by 0.5 percentage points to 5.75. So, and they have more room. When we look at the parity with the differential with the euro, they are actually in a good position. So that's another bank. We saw Brazil has actually started it, so they cut their rates by 50 basis points. Mexico, finally, they just cut their rates by 25 basis points. Brazil had already started doing that. Now Mexico is doing that. And the idea is Brazil will expect it to cut their rates by 225 basis points. Remember, Brazil was one of the first countries that actually started hiking rates way before United States. We continue. The Colombia also increased, reduced its rate, and it's down to 12.25%. There's Chile coming. So we can see many countries are reducing their interest rates. As far as you know how I feel about Vietnam. Now, in Vietnam, we've had a corruption in 2023 with the president, and now we are having the same difficulties with this president, Vo Van Thong. He stepped down as Vietnam's president in an abrupt manner. You know, it's in March. So it's important to know what is the succession plan. And I just thought to share with you, and also their ages, so you can see that what will be, again, the party general secretary, and the prime minister, national assembly head, and then, of course, this case is the president just resigned. Despite all that, I still, when you look at the big picture, as far as what Vietnam is doing, it's just a lot of promises, from demographically to technology to the future. But I just want to share this with you, how the leadership works. Moving to Africa, let's share some good news. Again, Ghana has had their problems. They've had again, help. They were in a year they spent in a default. But now the real GDP has grown by 3.8% year over year in fourth quarter of 2023. So this is important, although they still, you know, when you think about it, it's 2.2% on analyzed 4 quarters, which has been lowest since the pandemic started. But it is strong growth, so that's a positive. Going back to Asia again, Thailand has the highest household debt to GDP among peers. So when you look at Malaysia, China, India, and Indonesia, you see Indonesia has one of the lowest. So when you're analyzing, keep that in mind. We talked about Argentina, which actually it was up pretty nice this week. Really, one of the things is President Milei, he has little control over Congress. You can see that his party, La Libertad Avanza, is, and then he has his coalitions, doesn't have a lot of hold. So it needs really the independence. You see how big they are. So, but the other thing I'm, you know, bringing the politics here, but it has affected, I think, even the businesses. You see the younger voters are less interested in global conflicts than older voters. But for them, Israel Hamas had hit a nerve, and it is important to them. And as I mentioned, when you look at the demographics as far as the age group, for instance, we see where the 1829 stands, how much of the interest as far as, let's say, China, Taiwan. You can see 65 plus age is very important. I mean, generally, you see how important the Russia-Ukraine is. But when it comes to Israel conflict, you see it, this is as of January 22nd to 28th survey. we see that basically it is more important to them. And when we look at, as far as consideration, how they are leaning, again, the younger they are, the more they are thinking that there is like a genocide going on. And they, some of them, if you recall, a lot of younger people, especially in New York, they boycotted, like, say, Starbucks. So it's just a little sentiment from, again, how the youth feel. And the last but not least, it's important. I'm working on a project, and some of the places that, the reservations I work with, they don't have a running water, but everybody has a smartphone, they have internet. So that's the world we are living. So you can see, I just thought this is interesting to see the number of smartphone subscription worldwide. This is in billions, seven, um, a when you over 7 billion, you're gonna go almost 7.7 billion. So let's talk about the lesson of the week, and I mentioned about FOMC. So we talked about that dot plot, and that is, sometimes you put a lot of emphasis, it's more of a projection, and dot plot, but it was in statistical chart, and we look at the chart that each Fed officially projects where the central bank key short-term interest will be. So they come up with this idea. So each member has its own projection, but this happens every 3 months. So what the market was doing, March was the meeting that they had, it was the one. So that's what market was anxiously. So you will have March, you have June, you will have September, and you will have December. And that shows which way they are leaning. So right now, as we will see in the chart, it looks like the latest projection is showing that the 3 rate cuts and 0.75% for the 2024. So this is where we have been, kept the rates steady. So even now, when we look at it, we see the markets, there's still 2 members think that they should be left alone for the 2024. There will be 1 rate cut, 2 rate cuts, and you see there is majority are looking at the 3 rate cuts to 4.7 75 basis point. Even one, it wants even more drastic and bigger cuts. So this is what the dot plot is. So you look at the majority or what they are projecting. And for instance, in a longer term, the whole idea is the target rate, the natural rate, obviously looking at here they're projecting 2.5% in the long term. So that's what the dot plot is. Now, the question is, how much should we put value on this? Of course, these are the members who make the decisions, but they don't even know. And again, it's very data dependent. So it makes the market feel good. So I'm not sure how, it's good to know, but I don't think it's as effective as people put value on. It's, again, it's more of a sentiment in a sense, because, they had no clue when they were increasing their rates. If you go back to look at the dot plots then, they would have been wrong, in my opinion. So here we are. I got a few tidbits about, again, where we are, and I like statistics and history. So here we are with election years. So election years score perfect record after a weak midterm. Remember, 2022, the markets were down almost 20%. So every time we've had a bad midterm, the election year has been very strong. So whether it's 1962, whether it's 1974 or 2002, so you see we've had a pretty good returns. And when you look at the average, it has been 12.4%, and the average return has been 13.2% in the election year. Now, we already are up very strongly. We really need to digest, but it shows you that history tells us there is a reason we have this up market, and basically whether there was a correction that cleaned up things in 2022, helping propel the 2023 and 2024 returns. Also, the first new high after at least 1 year is bullish. So every time we had a new high, and because after a year, you see 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, the markets perform tremendously. So we'd go back to 2016, for instance, the markets were up 13.5% a year later, and we had that. You can see we are hitting the new highs. Also, a good first 50 days could mean a great rest of the year. And again, we'll be looking at some of the best years and what happened pursuing years, except 1987, there's a lot of strong years. So in average, the markets are up 12.6%. So again, this year so far, what we did the first 50 days, we were up 8.3%. So it's compatible to, let's say, 7.8%. The markets were up 4.3%. The rest of the year, 6.3%, 19.7%. I like the 1990s, and we will discuss it. Like 1995, we were up 7.3% the first 50 days, and then they were up 25%. So just food for thought. On the other hand, just every year, average year, we are up 1.7% the first 50 days, and the market is up 7.6% the rest of it. So it is food for thought. That other thing is, this is from Ryan Dietrich. He says, we found 20 times the Fed cut rates when the S&P 500 was within 2% of an all-time high. So if that thing happens, stocks were higher a year later, 20 times. So it's interesting going back to history. You know, if you recall 1990s, you know, internet is just being introduced. And I remember I was looking at the basically what is happening with the RSI, look at the technical, and saying, oh my God, this is like really overbought. Well, the market continued this parabolic move in 1995, and they were up 28.23% from their trough. Well, end of October, if you recall, we actually bought them, and basically this is when we look at this is actually the continuation of again the 1995. They bought them in December of 94 when you look at that, and then continued, and it just kept going. They had just a little bit of corrections, and then they just kept going. So the idea is it possible that we, with this AI revolution and evolution, are we in a similar, really like to a second or third inning rather than seventh inning? So just a food for thought. This is as of March 21st on Thursday from Ian Macmillan. SPX now approaching the sixth strongest 21-week moves in its history. It's up 28%. Moving to something different, but still related to equity, going back to the history again, we can see that the household financial asset allocation as of the fourth quarter of 23 and as of March 2024, we are at 48% equity. And, you know, that reminds us in 2000, that's where we were. Cash was 15%, debt was 15%. And it's pretty close where we were. So just a little food for thought. Annual earnings and revenues, basically what we can see that the projection year over year, actually, I mean, the year over year, you can see, obviously we were comparing to 2020, you know what happened. And now, you know, this is a 2024's estimates. So this is, I mentioned about the 2 and 10-year yield curve inversion. it just happened, I think 2 days, well, on Thursday actually. And the length of all US 2 years and 10 years yield curve inversion that were longer than 3 months. And the current one now is the longest. We just went above, I think, 620, well, this is since 1956. You can see this just broke this 1978. So just whatever it's worth. That's from Deutsche Bank. Moving to something completely different, the wealthiest cities in the United States, which that's with the most millionaires. So we have 349,500 millionaires in New York City, and then San Francisco, LA. And then now we see there's Austin, Texas has 32,700 and Miami has 35,300. But the interesting thing is in the last 10 years, Austin and Miami have been the fastest growing. And then also San Francisco with large moves. So again, that was just interesting. And the last but not least, I mentioned about smartphones. I thought just a little interesting evolution of smartphones, where we were. My God, I remember these days at 1984, and it cost so much just the connection. It was expensive, and people had it in their cars. And then here we are, where we are. So amazing journey. Thank you very much. So this is the end of our second episode, and we will move on to our third, which is the trade of the week.